Uncle Si? And I said, okay, well, you made a point there. Si is definitely crazy. We went on we did a show on the Outdoor Channel, and then a producer in LA saw that show. And he sent me an email to the general information in the Duck Commander box. So you business guys out there, you never know what's going to come in that box. And the secretary came in and said, Willie, do you want to respond to this or chunk it? And so I called this guy. There was a guy from LA. He was a producer. He called himself an outdoorsman, which I learned in LA. That means you have a truck. You're an outdoorsman if you drive a truck. And we ended up doing the show. We made 2 pilots, and then it got picked up. And that little show ended up being the most watched non-scripted show in the history of cable television. Beat every record that they had. And it started right there from these crazy dreams and thoughts about building these little duck calls. But that wasn't our real passion. Dad took his passion of duck hunting and turned it into a good job. And I took my passion into business and selling stuff and made it into a good job. But that wasn't the real passion. The big passion was the passion that we have for the Lord, the passion we have for faith. Because see, we celebrated 50 years of Duck Commander, but if you go back 50 years ago, my parents were at the darkest place in their life. They were not believers in the Lord. They had split up. Dad was being chased by the police because he had beat some people up, and Mom had left him, and it looked like everything was over. In fact, we just shot a movie. It'll be out in September. It's called The Blind, and it's their story. It's the story of them coming to their faith. And so when Dad was on living out in the woods for months, he came back to West Monroe, and he was ready to obey the gospel. And you know, the thing was, Dad's sister, my Aunt Jan, who's passed on, she always believed in her brother, and she thought, and she went to this pastor and she said, if you'll talk to my brother, he will win thousands of people for Christ. And I don't know how she saw that. And so this preacher is like going, okay, well, have him come to church. And she goes, no, he's not going to come to church. Where is he? He's running a bar. Oh, in a different state. And I'll tell you, that preacher drove up to that bar, walked in, and shared the gospel with my dad. He didn't respond immediately, but when he came back to West Monroe, he said, where's that preacher? I think I need something different. And Dad sat down, listened to the gospel. He and my mom both obeyed the gospel. My mom forgave Dad. They came back together. So when I was this high, I didn't know a lot about Jesus Christ, but I knew this. Whatever he told my parents, life completely changed. And so if you look back, even as we celebrate our time in the business, without our faith, there never would have been a business. Phil was drunk all the time. He couldn't even stay sober to hold any job. But once Christ entered his life, he literally became a different person. And then he said, now, let's start making some duck calls. And so as you track through, the family stays together. I grew up with a mom and a dad. Our life looks completely different. I go to this church camp. That's where I meet my wife. We have kids. The Duck Dynasty show happens. So you're thinking about hundreds of millions of people have watched a show that ends with a prayer. We have millions and millions of followers on social media. We have podcasts. We've written books. I mean, we were in God's Not Dead, the movies. We just produced this movie that's coming out. And I can trace it back, the spiritual 23andMe, to that couple sitting right there in Junction City, Arkansas. And you tell me God can't work? Because sometimes I think we think about somebody, you probably know somebody and go, like, there's no way God could do something. You have no idea. So when we celebrate anything that has to do with business, we always first celebrate the faith. Because without that, our life would look completely different, and none of this would have happened. So praise God for that, for sure. So we're trying to make it